This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Okay then. I really didn't have a big intro planned here, so guess we're just shooting from the hip. I also did not plan for small children to be screaming at the house across the street either, so hopefully whatever party's going on over there doesn't get picked up on the audio. I think that's the same neighbor whose dog I almost hit coming home from work the other day. Just pulling up the side street in my car, and the woman was walking her dog, and it looked like the dog was on some kind of leash, and all of a sudden, as soon as I rounded the corner, the dog just took off. So that could have ended in sheer tragedy if I didn't pump the brake. Anyway, we will withdraw from long-form rants in this week's opening monologue. I think after Friday's 20-minute tirade on AEW, I burnt myself out over the weekend. Not that there was really a whole lot to rant about with either Retro Raw or NWA. They were both shows that existed. Retro Raw, say what you want about WWF in 1993. It was far from my favorite kind of wrestling growing up as a kid, but God, even comparing that to what you see most weeks on television from any modern wrestling promotion, at least you could say that Retro Raw was never boring. Also helps that the shows were only about 45 minutes in runtime around that early period before they went to 2 or eventually 3 hours. Still holding out hope that that's something WWE rethinks in the next year. Getting away from that 3-hour Raw format. It's been, what are we going on, 10 years of that horse crap? Whenever the Raw 1000 episode was, I think that was in 2012 if I'm not mistaken. Because I remember that show pretty vividly. God, 10 years of 3-hour Raws. And they're still going. Anyhow, welcome to the 5 Starr Wrestling Report. New and returning viewers. Last couple shows we've done have seen a drastic increase in new viewers, so maybe the YouTube algorithms are actually working in my favor now. We're getting some attention here on this small little podcast, and for someone that does this for sheer fun and hobby and nothing else, I'm just here to share my honest opinion. And whether 7 people watch it or 70 people watch it, the more the merrier, I always say. But make sure that if you are consistently checking out the show each week, that you subscribe, click the bell icon to stay notified of when our posts go up. Make sure to like the show, comment, and like I said, best support for the channel is just to stop back every week, Mondays and Fridays, and watch the program. Viewership is really kind of the only thing that matters at the end of the day now on YouTube, so getting those clicks, it's all that matters. Today's going to be a shorter podcast than usual. We'll get into it with the NWA report. Suffice it to say, I was under the impression that there was an NWA pay-per-view this weekend, only to find out that it's not for another 2 weeks. So I plan to review a 2-night pay-per-view event, only to come to find out that I have to wait another couple weeks for it. So today, we have the regular Retro Raw report and the NWA Powerrr episode that took place this past week. And as always, we will kickstart things with the Retro Raw report, our AEW Rampage substitution within the last month, and God am I glad I went with it. Even one of the dirt worst periods of WWF history from that 93 to 96 period, and trust me, for those of you that grew up watching it, you know what I'm talking about. Even all that crap is a million times better than anything AEW could possibly put out on that Friday night program. And the viewership reflects it. So for the time being, we are sticking the course with Retro Raw. By the way, for those keeping track, this was the August 9th, 1993 edition. And this was, as it's titled in the description on Peacock, and I quote, "The historic contract signing between Lex Luger and Yokozuna for their SummerSlam WWF title match." Because even in the year 1993, everything was the most historic or greatest fill-in-the-blank of all time. What was it? Was it the Randy Orton Edge match they did a few years back that was billed the greatest match of all time? And then when it happened, it completely fell below expectations. Well, I can't say for sure whether or not this was an historic contract signing per se, but definitely had its moments. And of course, we had the opening monologue here from the announce team before we got into the action, making all their plugs for the night, including the debut of the Macho Midget. And they actually referred to him as the Macho Midget, which is still astonishing to go back and listen to all the politically incorrect things that passed on television back before everyone went crazy. But the opener was Tatanka versus Mr. Hughes, which they advertised from last week's show. I think most of us presumed sheer calamity. It was boring. It wasn't good, but it was not a negative 5-star match like I anticipated. It is still hilarious to me how, in order for them to build up hype for The Undertaker versus Giant Gonzalez in a Rest in Peace match, keep in mind we still have no idea what a Rest in Peace match is up to this point, but their mechanism to build up that program is by feuding The Undertaker with, of all people, Mr. Hughes. Anyway, they wrestled for approximately 5 minutes, where within that 5-minute time span, 2 of which happened during a commercial break, Hughes proceeded to fuck up both a left arm clothesline, and he also did the spot again where he whipped the guy off the ropes and let the guy run past him so that he can yank him down by his hair. Yeah, that guy sucked. I think I see why he did not last that long in the business. And the finish is Tatanka giving Hughes a back body drop onto the floor and winning via count out. And that led to a heat angle afterwards where Hughes laid out Tatanka with the urn. Bobby Heenan proceeded to crack jokes, and I continued to ask the question, why would anyone give 2 fucks about The Undertaker and Giant Gonzalez? Granted, after the WrestleMania 9 encounter, that would have virtually been impossible by all accounts, but still. Hughes literally looked like he stepped out of a sauna after this thing was over, just sweating profusely. His shirt was drenched in sweat. Keep in mind, this entire segment went approximately 9 minutes, including commercial break. He did not have very good cardio. So that was followed with Lex Luger's Insider Story, Part 2. And if last week didn't cause you to reach for the barf bucket with all the rapid-fire camera cuts, well, they sure did the job this week. This week, Luger talked about school and pro football and disciplinary action. Interesting little tidbit here, though. I have no idea whether or not this was true, but Luger did mention here that he was planning on being an attorney at one point before making the decision to get into pro wrestling. God, could you have imagined? Counsel Lex Luger, attorney at law. I mean, the dude looked good in a suit, and he was well-spoken. I'd have hired him as a lawyer. So, that was a thing that happened. God, what the fuck are those people doing out there? I don't even know if this is picked up on audio, but just, I don't know, it sounds like a war zone out there right now. People screaming, there's metal clanking together, expecting gunshots to go off in the next 2 minutes. That was followed with the Bushwhackers teaming with Macho Midget to wrestle, as I wrote down here, a Beverly Brother, the Brooklyn Brawler, and a 5-foot lumberjack who I don't think they ever named. Bobby Heenan was convinced it was Hillbilly Jim. I thought he looked like Robert Gibson with Down syndrome. Anyhow, well, it was definitely a comedy match. Of course, they did all the usual comedy spots with the little guys here. Heenan also made every midget joke in the playbook. Again, very politically incorrect, but fuck you, it was funny. Vince spent most of the match not being able to figure out which one was Butch and which one was Luke. That was funnier than the Heenan jokes. And the finish was the Bushwhackers hitting a double DDT on Lombardi so that Macho Midget could do the assisted top rope splash and pin him. This was another complete waste of 5 minutes. Heenan's best joke at the end here is when he went, "I'm surprised he didn't use his finish. The small package." Get it? Because he's short? Then we had the all-important contract signing between Yokozuna and Lex Luger, a never-before-seen concept in wrestling, the infamous contract signing. Get ready for another 30 years of this bullshit nonstop. This one at least didn't end in the proverbial pull-apart angle like most of them do. Obviously, the big angle to take away from this was everything that involved Jim Cornette serving as, I forget what they labeled him here. I think they said a counselor or a spokesperson, something like that. Anyway, he was there to read over the contract. Talked about how Japan is a leader of the free world when it comes to economics and commerce. Says they are hardworking, honest, and diligent people that mean everything they say. Well, that last part is somewhat true, for better or for worse. At this point, I wrote down, it's a good thing Cornette is a heel, because in today's world, that promo would not fly on television if it came from a babyface. In fact, I'm not sure that promo would fly on TV, period. But the short and sweet of it is, Fuji thinks that there's an inbuilt bias in the contract because it was written by English-speaking people. So Fuji hired Cornette to make sure that Yokozuna wasn't getting swerved. So Cornette reads the contract over. And by that, I mean he proceeded to gloss over the fine print in a matter of milliseconds before somehow being able to determine that his contractual stipulation was included. I mean, I knew the dude was a fast talker, but apparently his reading skills were off the charts too. But they finally brought Luger out. Both guys signed the contract. And that is when Cornette brought up the big stipulation for the title match. If Luger beats Yokozuna for the belt, he becomes champion. But if he loses, he never gets a shot at the WWF title ever again. Keep that in mind for SummerSlam 93 in a few weeks, people. But Luger did his fiery, passionate babyface promo to get the crowd rallied up. They almost got into a shoving match when Yokozuna stood over and moved the table over, but they did not come to blows. And I believe Luger's closing lines here consisted of him saying that when Yokozuna is flying his plane back to Japan, the one thing that'll be ringing in his ear will be the chants that end in A, begin with U, and have a middle initial of, I heard F. I think he meant S. It was a good segment, though. If you had no knowledge of how they totally fucked this up in the next few weeks, you really would have thought at the time, wow, they're really grooming Lex to beat Yoko for the WWF title and solidify him as the top babyface. One would think. Put a footnote on that one. Then Razor Ramon wrestled a squash match. My notes simply read, they wrestled for 2 minutes. Razor killed the job guy with a belly to back off the second rope where he landed right on the back of his neck. And then Razor won with the Razor's Edge. There was literally nothing else to say about it. Then we had the quick SummerSlam report with Mean Gene. And our main event, the TV debut of the Heavenly Bodies. They will be wrestling the Steiners at SummerSlam for the World Wrestling Federation Tag Team titles. So now it is the WWF fans' first look at the happenings over in the Smoky Mountains. This was not their best showing, specifically for Jimmy Del Rey. Now granted, they were wrestling Bobby Who and another geek who I don't think they ever actually referred to. By the way, Bobby Who was the guy's actual ring name. It was a total Abbott and Costello sketch with the way Heenan joked about it on commentary. Regardless, they did not feed well for Pritchard or Del Rey. There's a spot where they went to do the super kick into the DDT combo, but Bobby started to take a face-first bump, so in order to save this, Dr. Tom had to hold the guy up so that he could set him up for a DDT and then plant him on the mat. There was also a spot toward the end where they went to give one of the job guys a double clothesline in the corner, and it was so poorly mistimed from everyone that Jimmy Del Rey completely missed the clothesline and basically fell face-first into the corner turnbuckle. There were definitely some audible boos coming from the crowd after that spot. So, like I said, not a very strong showcase for the bodies here, but it wasn't horrendous or anything. I always liked the Heavenly Bodies in Smoky Mountain, going back and watching those tapes years later. You know, they were never going to be on the level of the Midnight Express or even guys like the Rock and Roll Express or the Fabulous Ones or the Fantastics in terms of like top teams in the business around that point. But, yeah, they did some great work in that territory. And as far as I know, Dr. Tom is still running a pretty thorough wrestling training school right now in Knoxville with Glenn Jacobs. I mean, if you're going to get into the business, can't go wrong with learning from those two. I mean, you'll learn more in one day of training with those guys than you will training with most of the bums running outlaw schools today where guys pick up nothing but bad habits. So that was the show for the week. Not a particularly good episode outside the contract signing. And even then, the actual segment wasn't anything all that remarkable. It did establish the conditions for the WWF title match, though. So that was all well and good. And next week, oh, it's shaping up to be a doozy. We have, by the way, they actually advertised this. So for those of you that look back at the WWF around this point with fond memories, keep in mind that this was the stuff going on that they considered good at the time. Things that were worth plugging a week in advance to get you to tune into the next show. I read you the following. Giant Gonzalez will speak. Men on a Mission will be in action. IRS versus El Matador. That's Tito Santana, for those of you unaware. And this is the big one. Ludwig Borga. Yep. Strap in, folks. Ludwig Borga is going to be on Raw next week. In some physical capacity. I don't know if he's doing a match or if it's going to be a promo package, but yep. He'll be wrestling eventually, so prepare yourselves. So anyway, we'll move right along with NWA Powerrr here. And again, going back to what I talked about at the opening of the program, I have no idea why, but I was under the impression that it was this weekend where they were hosting the NWA 74 event. And then I went to the wiki page, only to find out that it is not until the last week of August. Just one of those quirky mind fucks, I guess. Not that I'm really complaining, because I really didn't have the mental energy to sit through a 2-night pay-per-view extravaganza this weekend. Just too much life stuff going on. So this was a standard Powerrr episode. And we open with a completely random, out of the blue, for no reason, tables match between Mike Knox and somebody named Devin Graves, spelled DE''VIN. If you are waiting for me to try and make sense of this, I got nothing. Once upon a time, I'd have probably sat here and ranted and raved about doing random pointless gimmick matches that are totally uncalled for. But considering that I see them virtually every week on AEW, I think I've just accepted that it's going to happen in every promotion now. The only sense I can make out of it is Mike Knox did put Bully Ray through a table several weeks ago, so I guess that was enough story reason for them to book Knox in this tables match against a guy that we've never seen or heard of before. So in this totally random, unexplained tables match, where you would probably think that the objective would be to, put the guy through a table of some sort, well, of course, they begin the match with a lock up. Yes, they did chain wrestling to open this tables match. Because, the NWA was already synonymous with booking tables matches throughout their 70-plus year history, so it makes sense to do one here. All right, then. And the whole thing only went about 4 minutes. VSK helped bring in a table. Referee just waved his arms and said, okay, then. And they put the Devin guy through the table, and that was it. Oh, and Velvet Sky tried to act mad. It sounded exactly how you picture in your mind Velvet Sky being angry about anything. Very wooden. So that was the opener. And then they cut to the interview booth where Kyle Davis was with Jordan Clearwater and Black G's. And this was actually very good. Well, I should say Black G's was very good. Jordan really didn't do a whole lot except stand there and be sunburnt. But G's did a good job hyping up Scion's NWA National Heavyweight title match with Jax Dane. And moreover, he was actually being an effective old school heel here. Standing there calling everyone Nashville Neanderthals. Talked about how Scion is in training right now because he knows the road ahead of him. He puts over Jax Dane's credentials and the fact that he's a former NWA World Heavyweight and former Tag Team Champion. Keyword being former. And while he is the current 2-time national champion, Church's Money Enterprises plans to walk into the chase with Scion as the new national heavyweight champion. I mean, it's not rocket science, but this was very simple pay-per-view build. You got the manager putting over his man and talking about how badly he wants to become champion. He puts over the current champion to give him his dues, and you sell the people on the importance of the match and why we should care. Is it necessarily the most exciting thing to watch unfold on TV? No, but doesn't need to be. It's easy for people to forget about this, especially a lot of the younger fans watching today, but television is not about giving you all those crash TV, nonstop throw shit at the wall angles that you're never going to remember the minute the show's over anyway. It's about selling you on what's upcoming for the pay-per-view and why you should pay to see the end result. And you do that through promos, video packages, small angles and interactions between the guys feuding, and that's all you need. It doesn't need to be that hard. So this is good. Then we had a Pope promo, which I mean, you can never go wrong with a Pope promo. Granted, it was with May Valentine, which after last week's episode, she already started to generate go-away heat with me the minute I saw her on screen here. But at least she was interviewing someone who can actually talk. Her question was still stupid, asking Pope if he thinks he can beat Trevor Murdoch in their match later on. A question that sounds so generic and unoriginal, you'd have thought a WWE scriptwriter wrote it down for her. But of course, Pope's gonna Pope, as I wrote down. Talked about his illustrious career and all the legends he's been in the ring with over the years, to which I jokingly wrote down where, in TNA. And he said that while him and Trevor have had some bumpy roads to cross in recent times, Pope's goal is to go in there and be the best version of himself he can possibly be. And it was at this point I once again wrote down the lingering question coming off the last week's NWA rant. And we are paying for Trevor versus Tyrus. Why exactly? I do not know. And we had Wrecking Ball Legursky versus Ricky Morton in 2022 in a catchweight exhibition match, no less, whatever that means. The match was as good as you can get with a Ricky Morton match at this stage. It never ceases to amaze me how even in his mid-60s that Ricky Morton is still the single best underdog babyface in the wrestling business today. Not even close. They did the bare bones amount of work as humanly possible. Wrecking Ball got the heat on Ricky's arm. He went over and ripped off the corner buckle pad. And then after trying to charge Ricky in the corner with a splash, Ricky ducked. Legursky went face first into the exposed turnbuckle. And then Ricky stacked him up for the pin. I actually spent most of the match laughing uproariously about how completely inept the official was. And of course, it's the guy that I've joked about looking like he ought to be a registered offender. What happens is, Legursky goes to rip off the turnbuckle pad, and of course, the ref is looking right at him while he does it. So, does he threaten Legursky with a DQ if he uses the exposed buckle to his advantage? Does he throw the match out entirely and declare it a no contest? Nope. He simply points at Legursky and goes, no. Like he was scolding his 8-year-old dog for taking a shit on the neighbor's front lawn. Just stands there and goes, no. And then, of course, they do the spot where Wrecking Ball runs headfirst into the exposed buckle and, well, the ref just counts 3 anyway. Can someone please run a training seminar for the referees? Why is every modern wrestling official, no matter what company they're hired for, they're all fucking retarded? Every last one of them. No one knows how to properly officiate. I mean, AEW's crew are the worst offenders of them all because, their matches are just nonstop chaos and they don't even try to enforce rules of any kind. It's a fucking Chuck E. Cheese free-for-all in that monkey operation. But even the NWA officials, they're just as clueless as the AEW officials are. And NWA matches are as basic as they come. All they have to do is enforce rope breaks, illegal chokes and holds, and count pinfalls. And they can't even do that right. God, these people suck at their jobs. Hire me as an NWA official. I'd do a better job on my first day with no training than any of these jabronis. Skipping ahead through some infomercial stuff here. There was a Jordan Clearwater Joe Alonzo match that was just kind of there. The first thing I wrote down here, no joke, Jordan's hair. You had to see it to believe it. It's on YouTube, so just go pull it up if you have 30 seconds. Looked like he stepped out of electroshock therapy. The actual match was fine. Didn't really have any criticisms of any of the stuff they did. I think I've seen a couple of Alonzo's matches before. I remember he had one with Scion several weeks back that was very good, but I remember it being one of those who the hell are we pushing matches where, if I remember right, I think it was right before they pulled the trigger on Sion's heel turn. Meanwhile, he's going in there and doing a back and forth 50-50 match with a guy in Joe Alonzo that we'd never seen up to that point. Yeah, so the psychology of the whole thing didn't make a whole lot of sense. The kid's a good athlete. Didn't really show a whole lot in the personality department, but I mean, that's modern wrestling for you. Everyone can do the moves, but they lack in virtually every other department you can think of, including size, which, Alonzo doesn't really have that going in his favor either. But they had Alonzo work over Clearwater early on. Black Cheese yanked him off the apron behind the ref's back at one point for the heat. It was also one of those ref distraction spots where it's totally absurd because he has his back turned for almost an entire minute while Black Cheese is just stomping the shit out of the guy on the floor. Just completely oblivious. But Clearwater went over with the big boot. Yeah, you heard that right. They did flashy moves galore. All this fast-paced, high-risk offense. And the finish is Clearwater giving Alonzo the running boot to the chest. That was enough to kill the guy for the pin. Very silly. We had an Angelina Love pre-tape where the only thing I took away from it is that I think they have found someone on this program that now officially has more Botox injections than Mae Valentine. Apparently she's going to try and convince Velvet Sky to give up her Championship Series title shot. Even though Velvet's retired, yet somehow she won a Championship Series title shot, and yeah, I have no idea what's going on here. Just like that, though, we have arrived at the main event. It is Pope versus Trevor Murdoch in a match that is happening because reasons. I'll actually give the announce team credit on this one, because they bothered to explain the backstory with Pope and Trevor, and I mean, they sure haven't been explaining it well in promos, so someone's got to do the job. Anyway, it's a very solid little match. The obvious story here is that Trevor came in with a chip on his shoulder, so as the match progressed along, he was working more and more heelish. They kept things simple at first with chain wrestling and keeping it moderately professional, but then they had the spots where Pope would try to hold the ropes open so Trevor could get back in, but Trevor popped him in the jaw with a cheap shot. Things eventually built to the big angle at the end. Trevor dumped Pope out to the floor, and after Pope tried to ram Trevor into the corner post, Trevor sidestepped it so that Pope went headfirst into the post, and that led to him teasing a pile driver on the cement floor, but before actually hitting him with it, Trevor let go of the grip, and both guys took the count out, and they kind of ended things on a somber note, with Trevor turning over his shoulder to the crowd, and then walking away with everyone sort of stunned and unsure as to how to react. I thought it was a cool little angle, and it's probably the best way you can summarize the entire segment. It wasn't so much of a match, but an extended heat angle. There's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, Pope and Trevor have some ongoing story tension, and they've had it for a while now. I just think they haven't done a great job making it a consistent part of the weekly show. That's probably my biggest complaint about this whole feud. It's like, sometimes they draw attention to it on commentary and passing, but, we haven't seen a whole lot of Pope and Trevor interactions consistently on the show to make the feud feel like a top-shelf program. And again, the thing that infuriates me about the whole thing is that I really like the feud, and I'd be more than happy to pay to see it on the NWA 74 pay-per-view, but once again, we're not getting Pope and Trevor for the world title. Instead, we're getting Trevor and Tyrus, which I don't understand at all. I mean, they haven't built that program up at all on the show. In a way, I could have at least bought it as a story angle if they'd have actually had Trevor pile drive Pope on the floor here, so they could do as like a kayfabe injury to take Pope off the NWA show altogether. But again, they didn't go that direction. Instead, Trevor teased the pile driver, but then he just let him go and walked away. So, obviously there's more that's yet to unfold. I think my other big issue with the whole thing is that this is once again going to paint them in a corner where their world title match for the pay-per-view is going to be another heel versus heel scenario. They've already got one of those with Sion and Jax Dane for the national title, and I mean, now they've essentially turned Trevor heel here, and he's going to be wrestling another heel in Tyrus. I don't get it. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me personally, but it's like my go-to line. What do I know? I'm not the booker. I'm just a guy on the internet that complains when the booker does dumb shit. I mean, at the end of the day, the show overall wasn't bad. Honestly, I just found myself not having a whole lot to say about it when it was over. The NWA 74 build has been moderately underwhelming, especially in comparison to the hype to last year's NWA special when they had the Nick Aldis Trevor Murdoch match for the belt. And I remember that really vividly too, because it had a lot of hype and momentum behind it. People were actually on the edge of their seat anticipating that Trevor was going to win the world title in his hometown. And when he did, it created this big memorable moment for the company because people were talking about it. Again, there are always going to be the critics out there that say, yeah, well, it's Trevor Murdoch, but that was probably the last time that I really think NWA had any kind of steam or buzz to their product. This year's NWA event just doesn't have a whole lot behind it, but that's also kind of a general reflection on the state of the National Wrestling Alliance as a whole. I'll always have my usual critiques about the show, sometimes played for laughs, other times not, but I mean, genuine question, is it fair to say that the NWA in its current state right now is just bland, uneventful, uninteresting? It's not bad like AEW's product is, but at least AEW has noteworthy things to discuss after the show's over. I don't know, man. Ever since the scam-demic and NWA shutting down operations, especially after all that publicity they had with the studio relaunch in 2019, the show's been missing buzz. I think them losing Jim Cornette as a commentator was the first major blow because, regardless of how you feel about Corny, the guy has a very popular podcast that thousands and thousands of people listen to every single week. So, even if you weren't watching the NWA during its relaunch period a few years ago, you at least had guys like Cornette plugging the weekly shows and the pay-per-views on his podcast to let everyone know what's going on. Now they don't even really have that. Who else is talking about the NWA in any major capacity on the wrestling media outlets? I mean, there's people that do the show results and the news updates here and there, but is anyone doing any real long-form podcast discussions like I am? Where we break down the weekly shows and talk about the intricate details of the storylines like the same people do with WWE or AEW? If there are people that do it, I've never heard of them. It's becoming one of those things where as WWE starts to gain a little more traction with Vince out of the picture, I know we just did this with the Monday podcast not that long ago, but I'm starting to rethink another shift in the layout. We've already kicked Rampage to the curb because of how meaningless and dull that program is. NXT is a lost cause at this stage. Maybe NWA Powerrr is going to be another one of those deals. The show doesn't really have a lot of focused direction in terms of any long-standing feuds. The pay-per-view events are usually just random matches thrown together at the last minute with little or no forethought. I don't know, man. Maybe we ought to think about giving SmackDown a try in the not-so-distant future just to see whether or not it'd be a good replacement for Powerrr. The show is at least a Friday night show anyway, so it would tie in perfectly with the Monday report, so it's not like we'd be talking about the show a week out. We'll see, though. I think what I need to do is primarily judge it based on how good the NWA 74 show is. You know, if it delivers and it looks like there will be some promising fallout after the event, you know, we can stick the course with the show through the remainder of the year. But if it just winds up reverting back to the usual blasé format, maybe a substitution would be the best way to go. So stay posted for that. You know, a lot of this is more off-the-cuff thinking, so it's not set in stone by any means. You know, I'm more so just thinking about ways to preserve my sanity because modern wrestling is just so goddamn blah anymore. You know, people talk about it all the time. Oh, there's so much content out there. It's like, yeah, but it's all garbage, dude. It really is. You know, AEW is at least train wreck level bad like WCW was during its dying days, so I at least get entertainment value out of it every single week, but NWA is just... It's not really a fun show to sit through right now. And, you know, judging how no one really talks about it at great length anymore, surely I'm not the only one thinking that. You know what I am thinking? I think it's about time we wrap the podcast up for the week. I was going to make an Arby's joke, but the thought of it just makes me want to vomit. Now, we will save the vomiting for Wednesday night. Going to need to save the bucket for that one. Thanks for stopping in, though. Make sure you come back this Friday for the Dynamite and Retro Review Series portion of the FSWR podcast. I'll be in the loop about any potential modifications to the Monday show in the next several weeks. You know, as far as upcoming Monday shows, we still have the NWA 74 in a couple weeks. We also have SummerSlam 93 on the horizon, and we will be tying that in with the Retro Series extension. And I think the week after that was All Out, if I'm not mistaken. So, a couple big things coming up in the next couple weeks. So stay posted for that as well. Till Friday. Take care, all. Thanks for watching. Peace.